Historical figure?
I don't know. I think he was just a person. I don't know.
Just a normal person like us.
He was a selfless person.
I have no clue. He was a man.
I think he was marketing genius because he got people to believe him.
I don't think he's the son of God. I don't believe that at all.
If David Copperfield was in the day of Jesus, he would be Jesus.
I'm pretty sure he existed. I'm not gonna say that he didn't exist.
He was God's son, but so was Gandhi, and so was Muhammad, and so was, we're all God's children.
Jesus is someone I pray to.
Well, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and he, to me, is the symbol of just ultimate forgiveness and ultimate love. He's sort of that constant figure in my life.
Jesus is also Isa in Arabic, and he was a messenger as well.
He was just extremely enlightened, religiously and morally.
Was somebody that just tried to impart wisdom on others and make the world a better place.
I think he saw something that a lot of people didn't see and still don't see in others. And I think that's just a lot of love and hope.
Jesus sort of seemed like an ominous figure. He was God, and it was hard to relate to him. But I think as I've grown in my faith a lot, I've really started to see Jesus as my closest friend.
Good morning. How are we doing? Good. Nice to see you guys. Like Pastor Kyle said, my name is Megan, and I am one of the teaching pastors here at Real Life. And I get the privilege of teaching while Kyle is in town. This is new. If any of you have ever worked in the service industry and waited on tables, it's like when you had to shadow the guy that was training you, and then you get up and they're watching every move, and you're like, oh my gosh, I messed up, I gotta get the water. So anyway, I'm just so glad that I get to be a part of this church community. I'm so glad that I get to unpack the Bible with you today and talk about who Jesus is and why it matters. I want to welcome Brewster, our online campus. They're out. We aren't just here. We're multiple different locations, and I'm super grateful for Pastor Billy and his team up there, and then we also have online viewers. So we have people that stream in every week, whether they're here in town or they're all over the nation, really. We are just in multiple locations, so I just want to make sure everybody is welcome here this morning. How many of you guys went to the open house last week? Did you get, wow. Wow, 7 of you? Man, there was 230 hot dogs we gave away, so somebody must have had 17 hot dogs. If you were at the open house, Ellen did a great job. She made these passports, and at the end of it, if you took a tour, we're like, hey, you can win a $50 coffee gift card to the Vine Coffee Shop, which is now open at the community center. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a live drawing right now. And I'm going to call the name, and it's just going to be the best day of your life. Are you guys ready? And if you were in Brewster and you drove down to take the tour, or if you're online, don't worry. You don't have to be present to win in this moment. Are you guys ready? I know you've been waiting for this. All right, this is how we're going to get this started. Let's see. All right. I'm not looking. I'm not looking. I'm not looking. Who is it? Shane Orton. Woo! Shane Orton. Not here. So you don't have to be present to win, Shane. I have the gift card on me. I'll have it at the offices, so come and grab that. Although Kyle did say the longer it takes you, we take $5 off that gift card, so make sure you get in or it's going to be $0 by the end of the week. Okay, so yeah, we're very excited about the open house, the community center. Eventually, we are moving over there as a church family, but right now we're just celebrating the end of phase 1. That means that we get to have our staff meetings there every week. That means Rendezvous, which is our middle school and youth group, that they get to meet there. Celebrate Recovery, Lynette's going to be launching that soon. That will be meeting there. Serve teams. It's just such a gift. And just hearing all of your voices, the kids running around. I heard there was a screaming contest in the child's area last week. That was awesome. It's such a picture of where we're going and where we're heading in the future. So it's definitely something to celebrate. Like Kyle said, we are in a new sermon series called Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door, Who is Jesus and Why It Matters. And of course, if you're like me, this sermon title reminds you of Bob Dylan. Yeah? Right? Any Bob Dylan fans here? Yes, I see your hand. I see that hand. Yeah, so Bob Dylan. So I was talking to my kids this week. I'm like, we're doing a sermon series. It's based on a song written by Bob Dylan. My 14-year-old son is like, who's Bob Dylan? And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, have I failed miserably as a parent in this moment? I realized there's this whole generation of kids that might not know who he is, you know? And then my daughter, my sweet, loving daughter, she pipes in. She's like, Mom, I know who Bob Dylan is. And I was like, oh, good, okay, who is he? She's like, he's the guy who has the big hair and he paints on the canvas and he talks really low. I'm like, no, that's Bob Ross, close, not yet there. So I just thought, before we get started, I want all of us to be on the same page. I just feel this like weight on my chest. We all need to know, especially for Gen Alpha. We got some middle schoolers, high schoolers. I'm just gonna do a little public service announcement, so we all know. So Bob Dylan is an iconic American singer-songwriter. He emerged onto the music scene in the 1960s. I know that feels like a very long time, but he is the poster child for blending folk, rock, and blues, right? Iconic, legendary songwriter. I think we have a picture of him. Look how cool this guy is. Like, you don't get cooler than Bob Dylan, right? He's so iconic, he's legendary, and also at this time, middle schoolers, high schools, they didn't know cigarettes were bad for you. They just didn't know, they didn't have the information, so I wanted to put a little label just so everybody's comfortable, everybody's good, you can relax. But no, Bob Dylan was iconic. He was legendary, and so my husband and I, we actually had the privilege, before we were married, so like this is almost like 20 years ago, we went and saw him live. We got to go see a show, and he was headlining. Merle Haggard opened. I'm a singer-songwriter. Sometimes I lead worship. I play at wineries. So for me, it was like, I get to see this guy live. Like, this is amazing. So we show up, Merle Haggard brings down the house, and then Bob Dylan comes out. And I don't know, there's probably some of you in this room probably saw him in his prime, and I'm really, really glad for you. I don't know if I did. So we get there, and Bob Dylan comes out, and I kid you not, for an hour and a half, imagine this is your experience of this iconic legend. Okay, he's like, knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, Stephen can attest, that's my husband. It was an hour and a half of him mumbling and stumbling across the stage, and we walked back to our car, and we're like, well, that was the worst concert we've ever seen. It was super disappointing. Here's the thing. Bob Dylan was not a performer. He never claimed to be a performer. He claimed to be a songwriter. And when he was interviewed, he said this. He said, I started writing because things were changing all around me, all the time, and a certain song needed to be written. And I feel like he actually sets us up really well for where we're going to be going in our teaching today. Because Jesus, when he came onto the scene, when he came onto the world stage, when this guy that generations of Israelites and Jews had been waiting for, when he comes onto the historical scene, they're like, what? He was sort of a disappointment. A lot of people were expecting him to be this warrior, to be this king, to come in with authority, and he came in as like this nobody from Nazareth, and it was kind of underwhelming. And for some people, it was a little disappointing. But here's the thing. I do not believe that Jesus came to perform for any of us. I don't think he came to wow the crowds. Honestly, I don't even think he came to convince us. I think that Jesus came because things were changing and a new story was being written. Like Kyle talked about last week, there are 4 books in the Bible, and they are biographies of who Jesus was. They are either first-hand accounts or interviews from eyewitnesses that saw Jesus, knew Jesus, lived with Jesus. And so last week, we talked a lot about Luke. And Luke was this orderly account. It was these facts. It was linear. He went out and he interviewed all the people that knew him, and he gathered these facts together. And so they wrote everything down, these different authors at the time, because they knew that something extraordinary was happening, and they needed to capture it. So I was thinking, if Bob Dylan can tell us, who's just a human, why he made music, shouldn't we just listen to Jesus about why he came? Like, who did Jesus say he was? Who did he tell the world that he was? Who is Jesus in his own words? And I believe that the book of John actually gives us a lot of insight. While we were in Luke last week, it's all these facts, it's very linear, it's chronological. John is actually on the far other end of the spectrum, and he wanted to capture who Jesus was relationally. He knew John personally. They were very, very close. If we had to use language, they were best friends, I guess, in a sense. He knew Jesus on a very personal level. So, John is the only gospel to actually include this section of scripture we're going to go through today called the I am statements. And what are the I am statements? They are Jesus' words about who he was. There's no hearsay in these, there's no outsourcing. It's just straight from the horse's mouth. The book of John records Jesus' words himself from the author who knew him best. So it's a good source to go to. So there are 7 I am statements, and I'm going to go over them today. We don't have enough time to dig deep into each one of these. We're going to do a brief overview, but I just want to get this conversation started because I think it's a really important one for the series that we're in. So here's who Jesus said he was in his own words. He says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. That's all you need to know, right? Are you convinced? Are you 100% sure? It's like, oh, well, that just clears it up, doesn't it? Really, really helpful. Let's be honest. When you read these phrases, it's not super convincing. And if you're new to this Jesus thing, if you kind of, are far from God or you've never really entertained what a life of faith looks like, you're like, I don't get it. Like, if he wanted me to believe in him, why wouldn't he just come right out and tell me who he was? Why wouldn't he just be more straightforward? What's all of this metaphor language? One reason that we're going to talk about in a minute is I think there's a purpose to this. I think there's a reason why Jesus doesn't just come right out and state the things and hand you the artifacts and give you all the facts. My son, Jameson, who doesn't know who Bob Dylan is, he also used to be this cute little adorable boy. When he was 6 years old, I remember I put together oh, there he is. See, this is his pirate phase. Well, it was kind of like a pirate Jurassic Park phase. It was kind of confusing, but it was 2 things happening at once. And it was his 6th birthday, and at the time, I remember our finances were pretty tight. But birthdays are a big deal in my family, and I wanted to make it a great celebration, so I was trying to rack my brain of how I could make it special. And we have this family tradition where we do these scavenger hunts on Christmas. And we write all of these clues, and they're kind of cryptic, and they're a little hard to understand, and you have to work through them, and eventually you get to the end, and it's like your big gift. It's like what you've been looking forward to. So I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to break tradition, and I'm going to give him a scavenger hunt for his birthday, because that's how I can make this special without breaking the bank. And then what I did was I went to the thrift store, because every kid loves his birthday gift from the thrift store. And I went to the thrift store, and I found something that looked like a pirate chest, and they filled it up with all kinds of junk that looked gold or shiny. And when they're this age, you can give them dollar store gifts and junk store stuff, and they're just so excited. It's like you're just get free. It's like a get out of jail free card. So I put all this stuff into this pirate chest, and then I had another brilliant idea. I'm like, I'm going to bury this in the backyard. Because what 6-year-old doesn't want to have to bury his gift out of the ground? That sounds like an awesome idea. So I do this whole thing. I make these scavenger hunts. I even do the black tea thing on a map so it crinkles up and it looks like it's authentic. I don't know if you've ever done that. I'm kind of a craft nerd. Anyway, I do this whole elaborate deal. At the time, we lived in Bothell, in the Pacific Northwest, and so it rains all the time. And this day was no exception, and where I had chosen to bury the pirate treasure just happened to be this beautiful part of our yard that would puddle with mud. And it was just super wet and gross. So the 6-year-old wakes up, and I'm like, we're doing a scavenger hunt. We go through this whole thing, and then we get down to the basement door, and he's starting to put the pieces together. And I'm standing there, and I hand him a shovel and a rain jacket, and he's like, what? Where's the fun gift thing? This is when I unwrap the present. This is when we get to the thing. So I drag him out into the backyard. We start digging into the mud in the rain. It's cold. He's frustrated. I'm mad. I can't believe how deep I dug this thing, by the way. It's like, what was I thinking? I'm going. Finally, I hit the treasure. But what was really interesting about that is that somewhere between the last clue and hitting this treasure box full of thrift store junk, it became so much less about the gift. It became so much less about what was inside the box and so much more about the adventure and the journey that we had just been on. And that helps me when it comes to figuring out who Jesus is. When it comes to try to digging into the truth of who he is, I understand that we want facts. I know we want maps. I know it would be great if there was like an X marks the spot and it was just clear and there was no questions and we had everything answered. I get that. But at the root of that desire is actually this truth. That most of us, if we're really honest, we just want someone to hand us this fully assembled faith without having to work through the messiness of it ourselves. And faith can be messy. It can be disappointing. You can be like, hey, God was supposed to be this, and he didn't turn out to be that, or I didn't even know that I needed God, and then I started believing, and then my hopes were dashed, or whatever your story might be. But when we're looking for this, it actually cheapens the gift of who Jesus is. It actually makes the treasure less valuable, and in essence, it short circuits the adventure that faith can be if you embrace it as such. So, when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am the resurrection and the life, I am the way, the truth, and life, and I am the true vine. What I think he's doing initially is he's inviting every single one of us. Grab your shovel, get your raincoat. Let's go out into the muddy backyard and let's dig for something that I actually believe is going to be way more valuable than what you're expecting. So let's do that. Let's do that together. Let's break ground together. That's what we're going to be doing. At the time that Jesus is writing this, the landscape of the historical context is that he's Jewish. And he's born into a Jewish culture, and Jewish culture is very rich with symbolism. So what do I mean by that? It means we're very facts-driven, we're efficiency-minded, we're like, here's our to-do list, let's check this off the box. They were motivated and understood and translated everything in their life through symbolism and story. So when Jesus is using these symbols, he's not trying to be cryptic, he's not trying to be confusing, he's not trying to speak in a language they don't understand, he's actually speaking in the language they do understand. But for us, thousands of years later, it takes a little bit of digging, so it's required. So we're going to jump in. The first one, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. So what I believe he's saying is that he is essential to your satisfaction. That he somehow is making this claim that I actually am the source for your true hunger. I can actually meet you in that and satisfy you. He goes on to say in this verse that whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Whoever comes to me will never thirst. What kind of statement is that? Right? We immediately go to like physical hunger and we're like, well, this guy's not legit. He's talking about that deep, deep hunger that each and every one of us have in different ways. The hunger for significance, that hunger for purpose, that hunger for meaning, that hunger for belonging, that hunger for love. He's talking for this deeper driving force that lives within each and every one of us. My friend Carissa, she makes bread. So I called her up. I'm like, hey, I'm prepping this sermon. Jesus says he's the bread of life. What do you think he means by that? And it took her a couple of days, and she got back to me, and she said, you know, when I think about the process of making bread, she's like, it might be that he's the bread of life because the real gift in making bread is not for the one who makes it, it's for the one who receives it. She said, bread makers make bread because it's a labor of love. It's not a lucrative endeavor by any means. And I think that's really applicable to what Jesus is offering each and every one of us. Ultimately, Jesus is a gift to those who receive it, and it came at a cost to himself. A cost to himself. He came, he lived, he died, he rose, all to be in relationship with you and to invite you into relationship with him. He says, I am the bread of life. The next thing he says is, I am the light of the world. Who saw the Northern Lights this week? Okay, well, the whole internet saw them if nobody in this room saw them. And I gotta say, I'm a little bitter. I'm a little bitter about this Northern Lights experience. I have tried multiple times to see them. I have tried very, very difficult. It's just like, I feel like they have favoritism. Like the Northern Lights just pick and choose, like, yeah, that one gets to see me. No, you. No, you go. We even got our kids in the car this week. Somebody was posting, I saw the Northern Lights. I'm like, get it, we're getting in the car. I gotta go see these things. So we get them in the car, we drive up the hill, we get up there, it's like dark, there's nothing. And I'm like, well, this is so frustrating. But it's also what makes the Northern Lights interesting, right? If they were there all the time, then it wouldn't be a phenomenon. It wouldn't be something that people are like, whoa, look at me, I got to see the Northern Lights. You didn't, which is how it feels to me. I take it personal. But when Jesus says he is the light of the world, he's this constant light. There's no wavering, there's no in and out. You don't have to be at the right place at the right time to experience it. He is constant. Now, what does light do? Well, I think it does two things. One, I think it guides us. Jesus says that he can shed light on your path. He can help you make better decisions. Kyle says all the time that following Jesus, it might not make your life better, but it might make you better at life. And that's what Jesus does. He sheds light on what's the right path to do, and he guides us. The other thing that light does, which is a less exciting thing, light exposes things. Right? It makes things clear. And often there are dark corners of our hearts that we never really want light to be shined into, and yet it's the source of what is bringing darkness to our lives over and over. And we call that sin in Christian theology, and we don't really like that word. But what it really means is that we choose over and over the thing that hurts us and hurts others. Usually, sin tends to be very self-serving in the beginning, and then it ultimately becomes self-harming at the end. But it disguises itself as the light of life. It says, man, if you drink this thing, if you do this thing, you're going to feel so much better. If you buy that thing, if you wear that thing, you're going to feel so much better about yourself. If you compromise yourself, if you join that crowd, you're going to feel like you belong. But when it disguises itself as light, it just increases the darkness. It never actually brings the light that it promises it will. Believe it or not, Jesus says, I am the light that you're actually looking for. I help guide you, I give you direction, I also help you become the kind of person that you want to be. And then he says, I am the door. I am the door. Maybe you've been tracking so far. You're like, yeah, I could use some guidance. That sounds good. I could use some bread, some satisfaction in my life. All right, that sounds great. This might be where the road kind of forks for you, and that's okay. But it's my job to tell you who Jesus said he was, not who I want him to be, so that I'm more comfortable with it. He says, I am the door. Whoever comes to me will be saved. He's saying, I am the only way to enter into a relationship with God and receive salvation. I want to take a minute and look at other world religions, just for a second. There are 2.4 billion Christians in the world. That's a pretty big number. But there are a lot of different faiths. There's a lot of different pathways and ideologies that people have. Like, for instance, Islam, that's 1.9 billion people. Hinduism, 1.2 billion. Buddhism has 500 million people following that. And what's really interesting about each one of these religions is that they actually make room for Jesus in their ideologies. They actually make room for him. Muslims believe in Jesus' miraculous birth. That's a hard thing to believe in. They're like, check, yep, we believe in it, all right. They believe in Jesus' ability to perform miracles. It's another really hard thing to believe. They believe it. They believe he was a messenger from God. But here's where it's different. They don't believe that he died a suffering death to atone for your sins. They actually believe that God rescued him from death and that he didn't have to die at all, and there was no sin covering, that Jesus was not the savior of the world. Hindus, they believe in multiple paths, multiple deities. There's different ways that you can get to God. Some of them see Jesus as like a Krishna or a yogi. They really recognize his teachings on love and compassion. But again, they do not see him as the savior of the world. In Buddhists, they generally do not see Jesus as divine, but he is an enlightened teacher. I'm not making a judgment call on anybody else's journey or where they place their faith. But here's what I can say with certainty, that none of these perspectives actually align with who Jesus said he was in his own words. Dylan didn't claim to be a great performer, he claimed to be a songwriter. Jesus did not claim to be a powerful God who escaped death. He did not claim to be a yogi or an enlightened teacher. He claimed to be the door. We talked about this quote in our staff meeting, and it's come up a couple of different times, so I'm like, all right, okay, I'll share it. C.S. Lewis writes, "Christianity, if false, is of no importance. And if it's true, it's of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important." I truly believe that figuring out, coming to some kind of conclusion, whether we agree or not, on who Jesus is one of the most important things you'll ever do in your life. Because I'm in seminary, I'm about to get my master's. I've actually looked into other ideologies, other philosophies. I've studied, I've read the Quran. I think it's important that you know what other people believe before you say that you don't believe it. And do you know what I found? I found that there is not any other door that opens up into a reciprocal relationship with the God of the universe that is built on what he can do in me and what he has done for me and not what I can do for him. This is the only door that swings wide open into grace. And I think that's why Jesus doesn't play well with others. I don't think it's because he wants to exclude people. I think it's because he wants to include people. Jesus says, "I am the door." Then he goes to say, "I am the good shepherd." The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Pastor Graham turned me on to a show called The Blue Zones. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a documentary where it goes all across the world and it finds these places where there's high concentrations of people who live to be 100 years or older. And they're trying to figure out why. Why do these people have such long lives? Where is this secret of longevity coming from? And one of those places that they went to was Sardinia. I think we have a picture of that. And what they focused on was the shepherds. And they discovered that shepherding actually promotes this strong bond of community. It's very family and community oriented. And what you'll notice is not just one sheep and one shepherd out there having like a one-on-one time. It's one sheep or one shepherd with a lot of sheep. So when Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd, I know my sheep and my sheep know me," just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep, he's committed to people, he's committed to you, he's committed to me in a very community-driven way. We say around here a lot that circles are better than rows, and we believe that. Jesus doesn't want to just be your private God or your secret belief or somebody you think about sometimes. He actually wants to be the glue that holds you and your community together. Research has actually found that being in community, which is what God is calling you to, is one of the secrets to living a much longer life. He says, "I am the good shepherd. I provide relational security within your community." And then he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And this one also goes into some pretty uncomfortable territory. It's when you preach Jesus' words, it's like, oh my gosh, when you really hear about who he claimed to be, it draws us to a line. And we have to decide, like, okay, am I going to change him to fit into my thing that I want to do with my life, or am I going to orient my life in such a way that makes truth for who he is? So when he says, "I am the resurrection of my life," he's saying that there's such a thing as eternity. There's something that happens after this. That this isn't the end of the story, that there is more to come. There's a comedian, and he's pretty crass, so I don't recommend him. But there's this bit that he has, and it's pretty hilarious. And so I thought I would just read it and share it here. I'm not going to be able to do it justice. But he says, some people think God created the universe. And some people think nothing created the universe. And then the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. And I'm like, okay, maybe, but do you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. This is the thing. He's talking about something that's happening in our culture right now. There is this alarming and huge number of people that are beginning to believe, there's 1.1 billion people actually, that believe there is no door at all. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. People that have been raised in a church and there's been church hurt, or they've never experienced him and they're like, this is all just made up, or maybe it's a fairy tale. There's legitimate reasons why people just don't think that there is a door, and I get that. But when you get to a place in your life where there is nothing and there is no one except you, that's a terribly lonely place to be. And it actually rips the heart out of what life was intended to be. Because here's the truth, that you were made by love for an eternal love. That is why you were created. That is why you were designed. Paul writes this in his letter to the Corinthian church. He says, "No eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him." For Christians, there is something after this, and it's something really, really good. But for those who are investigating Jesus, I get it. This is a hard thing to wrap your mind around. Where's the proof? No one's seen it. Randy Alcorn, he writes a book called Heaven, and he looks on every single verse that is in the Bible that talks about what heaven might be like. And he says this. He says, "You were made for a person and a place. Jesus is the person and heaven is the place. They are a package. They come together. You cannot get heaven without Jesus or Jesus without heaven." The resurrection gives us so much hope. There is something unimaginably good coming for you, for someone who is for you. It's actually a really, really good thing to believe that Jesus is the resurrection and that there is more of life to come. The last two I am statements of Jesus are actually great next steps. So every week here at Real Life, we have these next steps. We have things that we ask you to consider or things that we ask you to do. And that's just so you don't go from Sunday to Sunday just kind of doing the church thing, that there's actually an ongoing conversation that maybe you're having with your life group leader or with your friends to really unpack some of the stuff that we talk about here on a Sunday morning. And so the next one, the sixth I am statement that Jesus says, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I think there are some of you probably here this morning that you've been on the fence for a while. You've been coming here, been investigating, maybe you've been asking questions, and maybe today is your day. Maybe you're like, you know what? Maybe you are the way. Maybe there is some truth. Maybe there's more to this life than I've been living. We say all the time that you don't have to, believe everything to believe something. And if that's you, it's just this agreement in your heart and your mind, and you just say, okay, I believe you're there. Will you show me you're there? One of my favorite verses is, "I believe, help my unbelief." It can be both at once. So maybe today you want to walk through the door of Jesus. Or maybe you already have done that. We're having baptisms on November 10th. We encourage you, if you've done that, come celebrate with your community. Sign up on the app or on the website. I really invite you to step forward, say, and ask yourself, have I actually walked through this door? Am I ready to walk through this door? I encourage you and invite you to do that. The next step, I am the true vine. Jesus describes himself as this grapevine, and we're the branches and we're connected to him. So my next step is for Jesus followers in the room. If you've been following Jesus for a while, here's my question to you. How connected are you to him? How often do you regularly check in with him, pause before you make a decision? What does your prayer life look like? Are you serving others? Are you other-focused? Are you growing in what we call the fruits of the Spirit? How connected are you to the vine? Because here's what I've realized. The longer I've followed Jesus, there is always more to be tasted and experienced of who he is. And it's always better than you think. We have these 4 rhythms of real life: learn, invest, follow, and engage. The follow rhythm is focused on these ideas of spiritual disciplines, of spiritual practices. They're not so you can earn favor with God. It's not so he'll like you better so you can get a gold star. It's so you can actually sit there and experience him. When he says he's the bread of life, what is bread meant to be? What do you do with bread? You eat it. You experience it. It's a shared experience. How often are you engaging in the shared experience of what it's like to sit under Jesus and to become more like him? And then this final one is for the skeptic, it's for the doubter, it's for the person that's like, I don't think about God ever, but thank you for bringing him up for the last 35 minutes. This is for you. Can I encourage you, get out the shovel and dig for yourself. Don't take it from me. There's so much to be discovered, no matter where you're at. Ask your questions. If you've never been in a life group, get in one. Never read the Bible? Try it out. I encourage you to find out for yourself. And for middle schoolers, high schoolers, there's no age on this. You're never too young to start developing your own faith and asking the hard questions that you need to ask. There's no shame in not knowing, what is this about? Find somebody, a staffer, or your small group leader. Lean in and start digging for yourself. Here's the truth. Every single I am statement that Jesus says is about, it needs to be experienced. So when we say we are a church that helps those who are far from God find real life in Christ, what that implies is that there is an adventure, that there is a journey, that there is some digging that's required. For so many of us in this room, one of the most beautiful things about walking with Jesus is when he begins to prove these things to be true. And you can honestly say, I have stories about when he's been the bread of life, when he's satisfied me, when he's fulfilled me. I have stories when he's been the light of the world, when he shined a light on something in my life that I wasn't doing right, and I made some decisions to change, and my life's been so much better. He is the hope of my salvation. He is my future. When I walk through that door, I really have experienced a whole new perspective on life. It is such a privilege to know Jesus as the person he said he was and not who we want him to be. And I invite every single one of you into that adventure for yourself this morning.